Guys, Jarlath needs little or no introduction. Probably all I can say is that I'm kind of in awe that after he's been interviewed by Paddy Keelty last night on the Late Late Show, I happen to be the next. So to whom it concerns, this is Jarlath Burns. I promised Jarlath I will ask easier questions, so we won't quite go to the favourite Spice Girl moment, but I won't probably be quite do the Paddy Keelty thing. So you were on the Late Late last night, Jarlath, and it was a lot of discussion about current events and what's happening. And what came through was the whole idea of leadership and the fact that you're providing this leadership. Can you maybe just talk to us about that and what it meant actually to be out there talking about that and what it does?
Yeah, the title of this is Leadership in a Changing Association, but I think the association, it's actually a changing world. The world has changed tremendously in the last 10 years, and even in the last 5 years, I think, since COVID. And having been in education for the last 34 years, our understanding of the human condition has changed immensely. And that came across with Paul McArdle, who's just finished his 5-year term. He did 3 years and then 2 years. He did 3 years about 8 years ago, and then he came back and did his final 2 years in the last 2 years. And he hadn't a bad end to it, I have to say. I've seen worse ends to chairmanships. He said whenever he came back, he couldn't believe how much the role of being a chair had changed, how much the world had changed, how much expectations of him as a leader in Armagh had changed. And I suppose that's the key thing, the key message that we all have to take out of this. And one of the surprising things I found over the last week or so was people saying, well, why did Jarlath Burns do what he did? But in the GAA, that's one of the things that, because we're a grassroots organisation, I have to be available and I have to be there to make big decisions. And again, coming from education and coming from the Armagh GAA, one of the things that I found when I went under the Armagh executive way back in 2015 and I was Central Council delegate was that all of the executive committee were expected to steward at matches, all of us, and to do the worst jobs of all, to be behind the stand and dealing with people and dealing with problems and all of that. And you didn't always get to see the match. And that was something that Mickey Savage, who was chair at the time, was very strong on. He said, we are the people who have to do the hard jobs. We are the people who have to make the hard decisions, have the difficult conversations. And I would have very much had that style of leadership in school when I was a school principal, where I would say at lunchtime and after school, it's the senior leadership team who have to be out mopping the floor if somebody is sick on it at lunchtime or doing all of those tough jobs. You have to be seen to be in the difficult places, doing the difficult things, making the difficult choices. So that's what leadership is, really. It's, as I said last night, the first time that you have to say no to somebody is the day that you realise you're a leader. So. And there's great days with it. There's lovely, pleasant moments. 95% of what I do is lovely. I'm going to Clonduff Club tonight to launch a strategic plan. I was in Newtown Castle last Saturday night in Longford. Very small club, but people doing wonderful stuff. But if you don't take on with the proper leadership, all you are is like a monarch going around opening things and shaking hands. Like last night, people asked why I wasn't actually at the late. We had a manager meeting last night. That was my priority. And today, after this, I have an Ard-Corley meeting. So these are the things that you have to do as president.
So when you're talking there, Gareth, you're talking about leadership, and particularly the whole leadership driven by a sense of value and purpose in what you do. That whole moral leadership. Can you maybe talk to us about that? What does that mean to you in terms of the organisation and your own guidance on that?
Well, it's the GAA has these values. And values can't just be a tick box. And I remember back at the time whenever people started talking about values and talking about mission statements and vision statements and all of that. And we didn't really know what that was at the time, and we thought, is this all waffle? I'm sure all of us in our workplaces would have reached this situation where, what are the values of our association? What are the values, what are our mission statement? But we have to be true to the values. And our values are community, our amateur status, the respect value, which is so important to us, player welfare, inclusion, and teamwork and volunteerism. And it is the #1 job of the GAA president to protect those values. So Larry McCarthy handed this association to me last February, intact, with all its values intact. I have to hand it over to the next person the same. It doesn't matter about what I do regarding FRC or hurling development or amateur status or all of those other stuff. I have to make sure that I hand it over with our values intact. And in a changing, complex world, that maybe don't share the values that we have, because I think definitely the value of community is under attack, respect is under attack, inclusion, all of those things from a very secular world is under attack. You just sometimes have to stand very strong and make maybe unpopular decisions or make difficult decisions. But that's, until we change those values, that's the values and principles that I have to protect and defend as president.
And so for the people here, they're all leaders within their counties. How do they manifest that, or how do they be part of that?
Well, that's not going to be your everyday job. Your everyday job is running your county. Don't be getting caught up in values day in, day out, because there'll be plenty of other things to keep you busy, as there are me as well. But sometimes there will come decisions that you have to make, and you'll go back and say, where do our values stand on this? How is this going to impact on our values? And it's really a roadmap that we can navigate by, and it's not something that we should slavishly become adherent to, but it's something we should always have in our minds at all times, that the GAA is this organisation that is so much a part of Ireland, so embedded in this, because the reason why we are so embedded and because we have survived so much is because the Irish have this thing that is love of place. We love where we're from, right down to our townland. The closest our club ever came to a split, by the way, was about 15 years ago when we decided we were to have a townland competition over simple things like it's a knockout. It wasn't even football or hurling. And one of the things was you had to try and get as many people into a car and push the car to the 50-yard line, like stupid stuff. People nearly boxed on the field over it. And that's to do with the townland, which is the smallest unit, and right down in the family. But we have this incredible attachment to our place that doesn't really exist anywhere else. Certainly doesn't exist in England. And the GAA sits perfectly into that with our clubs. And that's why, that's a very delicate dynamic, and we have to do everything that we can to protect that dynamic, because it's something very, very wonderful. I remember Margaret Thatcher saying once that there's no such thing as community, only individuals, and individuals wanting to succeed. And that's as good a reason as any not to believe that that's true.
You made reference there to challenges. And you've spoken there about obviously the challenge to community. Is there other challenges like you're worried about? Is there other things that you're kind of,
there is.
Oh my God, this is coming at us like a...
We've a set of new rules coming in there in the National League, and I just hope that they all work. That's the first challenge that we have. The second one is that I have very, very ambitious plans for the game of hurling in the Hurling Development Committee. We're approaching that very methodically. That's something that you mightn't even see results of for about 15 years. We have a really good committee. We have a very, very strategic approach to that. That has to succeed as well. We've tried in so many other cases to try and achieve more people playing the game of hurling. And there are more people playing hurling in Ireland now than ever before and across the world. And I was at the games there in Melbourne, and one of the most fiercely competitive games I saw in Melbourne was the hurling final. So, you know, it's almost stronger in places like Melbourne than it is in some places in Ireland. But the big thing I think for us is demographics. That is the single biggest challenge. So I said in my last answer that we are about community, we're about people, we're about love of place. But if you look at North Mayo and how the population there is declining to an extent that it is becoming almost a catastrophe. And then in other places where the population is growing. So we have fantastic facilities in some places where we don't have people, and we have lots of people in other places where we don't have facilities. And that's a big challenge, particularly in Dublin and Galway and places like that. And one of the worst things about it is a lot of those that particular challenge that we have of demographics is something that is a government thing that we're really, really going to have to work very closely with government. And I've said it before, I felt that the National Spatial Strategy of 2002 was brilliant with the hub towns, and it understood the importance of rural life in Ireland. The most recent National Development Plan only has about one paragraph on rural depopulation, and I feel that the whole theory behind that is urbanisation, move people out of the countryside, and definition of a conservationist is somebody who already has a house in the country.
Okay.
But I don't say that. I'm very in tune with the environment. I drive an electric car. I try and reduce my footprint. I come in here on a train as much as I can. I take the bikes around. Don't get me wrong on that. But the GAA has something that motivates people in the countryside particularly, and that's why we have that. and we should do everything we can to keep it.
And what can the officers who are here today, and indeed the wider county officers, obviously not just the officers here today, but the wider county club officers, what can they do to address those challenges? Like how do they, and enable the organisation to continue to grow and adapt, not stay where we are?
Well, I haven't actually mentioned the biggest challenge of all, which is the 44 million we spent on preparing county teams last year. If I said, went around anybody and said, what's the biggest challenge in your county? It's county team costs. So this year we have the Amateur Status Committee who are going to report, and they are going to be coming up with some very, very, let's say, disruptive proposals that are going to have to change the culture. Because as we approach integration, if we're going to be integrating, we cannot be multiplying that by 3 or we're going to be going bankrupt. And if we're going to be integrating, we have to be considering equality for all our players. And we're not ready for that yet. So that's the first thing we have to do, to end the 44 million expenditure per year on county teams. And that's a very, very big challenge, because that's a high-performance competitive environment where you want to get an edge over your neighbouring county. I'm concerned about a number of things with regard to that, David. I'm concerned about the fact that I went out on a limb to support the ending of the pre-season competitions for the only one reason this year. And I mean, people would say it was irrational because we needed those competitions this year with the new rules coming in. But it was to try and get the return to training date to the 8th of December. Because the reason was, if we're playing a game on the 1st of January, the 2nd of January, we need to have 6 or 7 weeks. That was the reason. We took it away. I know all the teams come back early. I'm not stupid, folks. I know everybody come back maybe. So, the second thing was our under-20s. There's almost a crisis there. Some under-20 teams are training since October. Our development squads are costing us a lot of money as well. I'm not a massive fan of them. I think that there's a lot of money being spent on it. And if you look at the number of players who play a minor and go on to play a senior, it's very, very small. So how can we think that taking somebody aged 12 or 13 and spending a lot of money on them and trying to develop them is going to make a difference? So the amateur status, I think, report will have a lot to say on all of that. Thank you. Hopefully you'll be clapping me when you see what we're proposing, folks.
Yeah. Just to add that there is a follow-on later on. David Hassan is actually doing a presentation and a workshop on that later on, Uachtarán. So again, you're all welcome to attend that one. Well, I think it's aimed primarily at chairpersons, but yeah. In terms of resistance, again, you've spoken about some of the challenges there and the resistance points. What strategies do you use personally to deal with that resistance? Not so much as an organisation, but how do you cope with that as a leader?
When you're a leader, you have to try and build consensus. That's what it's all about. And that's whenever you're a chair of a committee, or if you're leading a team in a school or in a workplace or whatever, the most important thing that you can get around the table is trust. That the people, whenever we meet in the executive, is that there's friendship, there's trust, there's a bit of affection as well, that we can have a bit of a joke, have a laugh, we can laugh at ourselves, that there's no tension in the room. And then whenever we make a decision, we all go out, and whether we agree with it or not, it's everybody's decision. And you're always going to get resistance at times to things that you do. But if you know that what you have done is right and done for the right reason, that's okay. But what I would say to all of you is that there are times whenever you're going to feel isolated and on your own and lonely if you are in the firing line in your county for something that you've done. Never be afraid to lift the phone. I mean, there's a lot of people in here, fantastic people in here who can help. And we found that before Christmas, whenever the revenue had gone into 3 counties. And we worked very closely with those 3 counties. And we found that those counties found themselves very isolated. And that's why Tom and Ger and myself gathered all of the county officers together and said, right, we will take that hit nationally. We're a big organisation at the top, but see when it comes down to the smaller level of county officer on their own, in a room with somebody from the revenue, and them saying, see that nutrition expenses from 2018, they didn't adhere to the revenue. I need to see the receipts, and I almost need to see CCTV of that player going in and buying the food and him eating it. Like it got crazy at times. So that's why we're taking the heavy lifting on that away from counties. And we're always going to get resistance, but that's what leadership is, as long as we know we're doing the right thing and we're on the right path. And the other thing I would say is this. We live in a world where everybody now has a forum for an opinion. Everybody. And very often the people who are least qualified to say things say them. But they don't say them to your face. They say them on social media. So I would always say to people, never read the comments. The way I approach all of this is that there's a person out there called Jarlath Burns, who's the president of GAA, and he has voluntarily put himself up for election to put himself into that public space. And there are some people like that fella. There's some people who don't like him. And there's times I don't even like him as well. But that's somebody else. That's not me. And whenever I sometimes might read a particular thing that is written about me that is very uncomplimentary, I take that with the same pinch of salt as I take somebody who might write or say something that is praising of me. You just take it with a pinch of salt. That's difficult. That's a difficult thing to achieve. But once you do, there's a great liberation in it. You say, look, that's only somebody's opinion. And if you ever got to meet some of the anonymous people who write on these message boards and stuff, you would realize very quickly that their opinion isn't really worth as much as the people in this room, for example. You are the people whom I am answerable. It is the GAA. You are the representatives of GAA. So I would listen to every person here what you had to say about my leadership, the things I get right and the things I get wrong. Because I would respect your opinion, because you're all elected officials. You've put yourself up for election. You understand the GAA. You understand what we're about. You're the people I'm answerable to. I'm going up to Ardcole now, and they will have a lot to say about my leadership as well. And I have to listen to that, and I have to take that on board, because they are the people to whom I'm answerable. But I'm not answerable to the whole of Ireland. I'm answerable to the GAA in Ireland. And that's what I would say to all of you as well. When you sit in front of a county board, that's your people. That's the people who you're answerable to. You never dismiss those people. They are the people who are running the GAA in your county. But see all of the other noise that you get. Don't worry about those people. They don't really count. It's our own people. It's our own association. That's the people who you have to abide by what they say and acquiesce with and listen to them and take advice from them. That's the most important thing.
We have a lot of people in the room today, Jarlath, who are new to the roles. They're stepping up into these roles. And I use the term stepping up probably a bit too lightly. But you've stepped up now into the president's role. You're a year, coming up to a year in the role. What difference do you see yourself changing, I suppose, your style of leadership? How have you adapted to that?
Not really, David, to be honest, because I've always been in sort of leadership roles in my life. I've been captain at Armagh and then principal of a school and chairman of my own club, and I'm now secretary of my club. I'm actually now assistant secretary. They demoted me in my club. But I'm still in the WhatsApp group, which I suppose means something. But don't worry, if there's dirty work in the club to do, I get the call. Don't worry about that. It isn't really, you'd be surprised to how simple my own leadership beliefs are. As I've said before, you get the people around you and build trust, the people around you. So there would be 8 or 10 people that I would ring all the time. I would contact them all the time and say, what do you think? Is this good? Is that good? What should I do? Should I do this? Should I do that? And I would always listen to their advice. And I think for you people going into a leadership role, have somebody who can mentor you. Have somebody who will have the difficult conversation with you and who isn't just going to tell you what you want to hear. You don't need that either. Otherwise, then you'll just become a populist person. But 90% of the time, it's very pleasant and it's great to be entrusted with a leadership role in your own county. And enjoy it as much as you can, because the 5 years go very quickly. It's a whirlwind, and it can be overwhelming when it all hits you in the first few weeks. And speaking to some of the new chairs that we have, that's what they have said. And speaking then to the likes of Paul McCardle, who has ended his term, and Micheál Martin, who's ended his term, they say like they just cannot believe how much of their life they get back whenever you end it. But it is very rewarding.
Yeah,
I think.
You think? Unless you're back to being the secretary of the club or something.
Yeah.
Just can I maybe bring back to organisational level question, and it's around: are we trying to do too much? All things to all men
and women.
Thank you.
Let me think about that. Are we trying to do too much? The GAA is an organisation so many people look to now for leadership. That's a good place to be in, but it does give us challenges. And particularly that first value of community. And I remember the day that we launched the initiative on the 25th of November, the Game Changer Initiative. I remember we thought long and hard before we did that. And just if you look at the genesis of that, it went right back to when Aisling Murphy was murdered. And everybody was saying, what can we do? What can the GAA do? The GAA need to do something. We have to do something. What can we do? We're this organisation that is in every village, every parish in Ireland. We have enormous influence in this country. What can we do? So Colin Regan, who's our head of community, thought long and hard about it, and he worked very closely with Helen McEntee, Minister of Justice, and with Ruhama, and with White Ribbon, and with Women's Aid, and we come up with this initiative. And I remember on the 25th of November coming here to launch it, and normally what happens in a launch is you go down onto the field, there's a few people there, there's usually a couple of banners here, you stand behind them, you shake hands, do a couple of set pieces, and then you go up the box 686, and there's a few press there, a few other people, a bite to eat, and you launch it, make a speech. Now, whenever we went up to 686, the place was packed. There was standing room only in it. I'd say there was about 200 people in the room. I looked around and I said to Colin, where have all these people come from? And he says, Game Changer means exactly what it says. The game has changed. The GAA now has to use every single bit of our influence to shine a light on the issue of gender-based domestic sexual violence. And we have to stand up. We have to have zero tolerance. Now, the speech I made that day, I ran it through about 15 or 20 people to make sure that every syllable was correct and that we could stand over everything that I was going to do. So not wanting to go back to that, but that's an example of, are we all things to all people? There are high expectations of the GAA, there is no doubt about that. And there are times that we will do our best to try and reach them. We won't always reach them, but we do our best. That's all we can do. And I'm not saying that we should be the moral leaders in Ireland, Irish society or throughout the world. I'm not saying any of that. But we are a massive force for good just by being here. And sometimes we are called upon and sometimes we have to stand up.
Yeah, good point. We're following the chat with yourself this morning with Simon Kibley and with Claire Aiken. I might just come to Simon's work and the work that the crew, the team that Paul Donnelly and the crew around him working with Simon produced the report. Can I have your thoughts on that in terms of what it pointed to and how we react to it?
Well, it's something we constantly say that the GAA has this enormous role in Irish society, but how do we quantify it? We were never able to quantify it. And it was Peter Horgan and Cian Murphy and these guys have been on about this for many years. And it was actually Larry McCarthy, not me. I don't get anybody to give me the credit for this. It was Larry McCarthy, our previous president, who drove this, and Larry deserves great credit for it. Because Larry really wanted something, some sort of a metric by which we could say, this is what the GAA does for society. And whenever they added it all up, over, I think it was a 4-year study, and Simon's going to talk about it now, it worked out the GAA is worth 2.87 billion per annum to Irish society. That's a massive amount. And I know that we do think it's great whenever we get money back through the LSSIF, the Large Scale Sporting Infrastructure Fund, and through other infrastructure funds. But my God, we're only getting our own money back, because what we do, you know, one of the things that they said is GAA is good for society and good for the economy as well. And that they went to Thurles, to the Munster final, they went to the Ulster final in Clones, and they did a whole study about what that meant to the economy of those local regional market towns, and it was transformational as well. So I'm not going to say any more than what Simon has said, but that is something that we will be taking with us whenever we go and talk to government. In fact, we were due to have a meeting with the Taoiseach on Thursday, but we know that there's government formation talks going on at the moment, and that will be put back. But that's certainly something that we're going to be taking in with them, because we talk about challenges. We have a massive infrastructural challenge. A lot of our stadiums need either rebuilt or modernised to a standard that people nowadays expect of them. And we have to be very careful that we have 350 coaches. They do fantastic work for us over the year. We have to be careful we're not spending all our money on concrete, transforming these stadiums. But that work needs done, and it needs done very quickly. So that's going to be one of the first things. We know about the IIP, the Immigrant Investment Programme. That was stopped, but a lot of counties did do very well out of that. Kildare, for example, was one of them. Kerry was another one, and it was stopped, but we are hoping to get it started now. I'm not too sure if Paddy Keeley is here. He's one of the main drivers behind it, and he's done great work in getting it to a level that we can go back to the government with it to hopefully start it up with a new name and with a new focus, but with the GAA holding on to the fund. And if we do get that fund, it will be transformational in terms of infrastructure in the GAA.
Hopefully we do. Last night when we were having our conversations, it started and ended with the volunteer, Jarlath, and the challenges we're facing in getting volunteers and getting people to ultimately replace us and move on. Do you have any thoughts on how we do that, or how we best do that, or the issues, I suppose, around volunteerism? Do you have any strong views on that?
Yeah, I remember way back, I think it was in about 2010, myself and Kieran Leddy, back then when he was member staff here, worked on creating a volunteer recruitment toolkit. And one of the things that we said was that if you get somebody in, firstly, that if you ask somebody to do something, they'll usually say yes, as long as it is a small thing that you want them to do, and that it's time bound, and that they'll know exactly what it is to do. And in a club, there are many, many jobs like that. Like there are the jobs like the traditional ones, like the putting out of the flags and the lining of the pitch and doing the gate, for example, and all of those jobs that are not necessarily committee jobs, even just picking up litter around the place, or being there to close the club or to open the club and do all of those things. What we always found is that, I know when I became chair of my own club, if I went to somebody and said, look, I need you to do a job for me, just one job, will you do this job for me? And they would say, yeah, I would like. And that became their job, and they showed up. It was even down as simple as one of the jobs that we had to do was the very front of our stand, we have painted that one piece of wall white. And the subs always put their feet up on it, and it gets mucky and dirty. I went to one fella and says, could you just do your one job in this club is going to be, if you don't do anything else, will you make sure that at the beginning of every year that wall's painted? And it would take him a day to do it, and he would do it. And he took pride in that, and everybody knew that was his job. The second thing that we would do, I'm not telling anybody, I'm sure you all do it, is that whenever we would come down to our club, if we have a day's work to do, and we're after putting a new extension onto a resource centre there, and we do all of our work's done voluntary in Silverbridge, make sure that if somebody shows up to do something, that there's a photograph taken of them and it's put on WhatsApp, on all the WhatsApp groups in the club. So they know, everybody knows that that person came down. And that's a way of saying thank you to that person. Thanks for doing that. And you don't even have to say, David was down wiring sockets for, but you don't have to say that. Just take a photograph and say, great crack in the resource centre today. That's all you have to say. And then other people watch that and they say, God, maybe I'll go down. So I know in our club is different because we have a big resource centre. It's almost like running a hotel complex. And about every week there'll be something big in it. So a call goes out on a Thursday. We'll need people to put out chairs tomorrow at 7 o'clock. And then people will appear and do it. That's all they have to do. And then they go home again. We have a bit of a crack, maybe a cup of tea, and go home again. So you turn volunteering into something which is specific, that you're not asking the same 2 or 3 people to do everything. And then that creates around the herd instinct that, well, he's doing it, she's doing it, they're doing it, maybe I'll go down and give a hand as well. And the other thing I would say is this. Whenever you go to under 8, under 9 training in any club and you walk around, you'll see an awful lot of people that you haven't seen before around the place. These are new people coming into the area, maybe particularly a wife who is married into the area. If you're a club officer, have a chat with those people and say, how would you feel about joining the hospitality committee, or how would you feel about maybe doing some work with Gaelic for mothers or or whatever. And people, particularly new people in the area, they know that if you want to become involved in the community or get to know people, do it through the GAA club. That's how you do it. So there's various little strategies. People will help out if they're asked, and if the job that you give them to do is small and time-bound and specific to them and that they can own it.
I'm going to ask you a question, and probably counterintuitive, but you've spoken about the role of the volunteer. You've spoken about the impact of the GAA. Are we too reliant on volunteers? Can we expect our volunteers to deliver upon the expected level of change? Just are we, like, fundamentally, we're volunteer reliant, but are we too volunteer reliant?
I'm going to go back to the club in that. Anybody who's coaching at a club level, I started this by saying that society has changed profoundly. So it used to be that if you had an under 14 team and you were putting them out and there was a player that wasn't all that good and wasn't getting on, Mummy would say nothing. They would just accept that my lad's not all that good. That's not the world we live in anymore. Mummy wants to see Adam playing playing on the field. And the difficulty with that then is for the manager, particularly if you have a good team. I remember 2 or 3 years ago, we won the Under-16 championship. And at the celebrations in the club that night, one of the parents came to me and said, this is the worst year my lad ever had. Because we had a good team and we won league and championship, he never got playing because every game was a competitive game. And that's difficult because we try and have inclusion as one of our values, that there's a place for everybody. But as we know, the world has changed, and there is this incredible sense of entitlement that some people have, that they might be involved in the club, but if they send their child down to the club, that you're there to provide a service. Even though you're a volunteer, you're providing a service to my child. And if somebody looks sideways at my child, well, you're to blame. What are you going to do about that? And that comes up in clubs all the time now, and in our club as well. Every club is facing that. And that's the biggest thing that can put a strain on people, that expectation of others. And one thing that we have found in young people is that if you talk to young people 10 years ago, what is the biggest issue in young people? It was self-esteem, their self-esteem, how they felt about themselves, their image. Now, if you talk to young people, it's anxiety. Young people have terrible anxiety problems, a lot of them. And as a result, they're not resilient. Like, I know back when I was growing up, if I had gone into my dad and says, I'm a bit depressed, he would have said, would you get up there and brush the yard and catch a grip in yourself? And you did that, and you didn't think about it. I'm not saying that was the right thing to do, but it worked anyway. And nowadays it's different because we listen a lot more to young people, and they're not as resilient as they were. But the result that impacts on life in the club, particularly when you're working with young people, and young people are what we're about in a club because they're the future. So being a volunteer in a club is a lot more complex than it was even 10 years ago. And that's the first thing I said when I came here. But equally, I would still say that being a volunteer gives you a sense of purpose. And that's what the human being needs to exist. A sense of purpose. So from our perspective, if you look at all of the mental health issues that's going on around the world, it's from people who have lost their sense of purpose. Why am I here? What is my role? What is my purpose? Well, I can tell you, if you're volunteering in the GAA, you're not asking that question because everybody knows what our purpose is.
Yeah. Can I close with this question? It's tied to that as well. What's your sense of purpose as a leader?
Jesus.
Oh, sorry.
Paddy Keelty didn't ask me that one last night. What is my sense of purpose? Well, at the moment, it's to lead this organisation and to hand it to the next person intact. And to try and bring in the changes that I felt needed changed. Year one was, as we know, the game of Gaelic football needed changed. We all know that. Year two is the amateur status, and it is a big, big challenge for me. Year three, obviously, is going to be where we're going to start seeing the first elements of the Hurling Development Committee coming to fruition. And there's a whole lot of other things that are in there as well, which are the whole thing around governance and how we govern ourselves. And I suppose they are the three big things that I would be judged on more than anything else, because 3 years is a very short time and you've forgotten of it very quickly. And the last thing you can think of, as I've said this on so many occasions, is legacy. We're 140 years old this year. Forget about thinking you can do any sort of legacy in 3 years. 10 years, 20 years of legacy. I'll tell you what left a legacy. The strategic review report of 2000 that was launched by Sean McCaig, that was a legacy. That man has a legacy that we're still seeing. Peter Quinn, Croke Park. Think of the criticism he took over Croke Park. Delivered 16 million to us last year. Where would we be without it? That was legacy. That's genuine legacy. What I'm leaving, if I ever leave a legacy, will be something very small in comparison to those guys. They were giants of this association. So I would have great respect for all of those people who came before me. They all had faced their own challenges. I'm facing challenges as well. But I'm confident that I'll do my best to come through them and try and be the president that I want to be and for the association.
And can I, on behalf of everybody here, thank you for that work that you are doing. It's a huge task that you take on and that you do, and we really appreciate that. And can I finally just say thank you very much for taking the time, I know you're very busy, to be with us this morning and to answer the questions. I mean, most of those questions, guys, came from yourselves. They were submitted. I had a big long list of questions that people put in, and just say thank you all very much. There's literally one for everyone in the audience. So just to close off with the last late show reference. But finally, Gareth, just thanks again. And
Thank you.